professor, fellowship at Tokyo University, and Fulbright grant to India. Martin's work has been featured at numerous conferences and festivals worldwide, solidifying her reputation as a prominent figure in contemporary theater and performance studies. So today, Professor Martin will share her expertise in a keynote titled Moments Between Murder, Teaching Women Who Kill, which will undoubtedly enrich our understanding and provoke stimulating discussions. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Carol Martin. Welcome to the stage.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that very lovely introduction, and thank you to everyone at Performing Tangier Festival, which is really an extraordinary experience. So the title of my paper is Moments Between Murders, Teaching Women Who Kill, that's my course, at NYU Abu Dhabi and NYU New York. In his introduction to The Maids, which is one of the plays I use in my course, Jean-Paul Sartre writes that for Genet, whose grave is about 55 miles from here, the play is an, quote, incantation and a black mass. In The Maids, the younger maid Claire plays the madam of the household in a treacherous game of love, hate, and murder with her sister Solange, who plays Claire. Together, the maids enact the class and power dynamics of domestic servants and their employers. The Maids is commonly understood to be obliquely about the real murders that took place in Le Mans, France in 1933, where two real sisters, Christine and Leah Papin, murdered their employer, Madame Léonine, and her daughter, Geneviève, by bludgeoning, stabbing, and gouging out their eyes to the point of being unrecognizable. Famously, the judge at the Papin trial focused on the sisters' reputed incestuous relationship, as if naming their relationship as incestuous and lesbian, the murders could be explained and the sisters could be distinguished from other women, a differentiation that recurs in both real and fictional accounts of women who kill. People all ask me, how did you think of that course? And it just kind of popped into my brain one moment, and there's a lot of stuff online about this subject. Genet's play does not show the Papins' murder of their employers per se, but rather what Sartre calls a, quote, whirligig of appearances. In the case of the elder sister Solange, we see an actor playing the role of a servant who's playing the role of a servant. In the case of Claire, the actor is playing a servant who is, am I echoing here? Maybe I'll move this away a little bit. In the case of Claire, the actor is playing a servant who is playing the role of Madame, the employer. The actors assume the fictional identities of servants who are play acting other fictional identities drawn from a real-life murder. In order to be true, Sartre writes, an actor must be false. But with Genet's The Maids, both the actors and the characters are false. The appearances and disappearances of the actors, the servants, and the madam are what Sartre calls phantom play acting. When Claire plays Madame, whom she equally loves and hates, she both escapes herself and makes a phantom of Madame, the character, appear. But the appearance is an enactment, an incantation, a madam who is the product of Claire's experience embroidered with imagination. Genet denied that the 1933 Papin murders influenced his 1947 play. Genet would have been 23 years old at the time of the murders, which were sensationalized in the French press and drew great interest from leading French intellectuals Simone de Beauvoir, Jacques Lacan, and Sartre, as well as Janet Flanner, who wrote the first letter from Paris column for the esteemed American magazine, The New Yorker. Scholars agree that Genet knew about the murders. Here is scholar Paula Kamenisch's account of the crime's influence. Quote, the responses of Lacan, Beauvoir, and Flanner to the Le Mans murders proved to be crucial in a study of literary influence because they stimulated the creative imagination of at least two critically acclaimed playwrights, Genet and more recently Wendy Kesselman, whose play My Sister in This House is about the same subject. So the Papin sisters refused to speak at their trial. Uncertainty about the motive for the crime has generated continuing interpretation and reinterpretation in books, films, and plays. Most recently, the South Korean film director Bong Joon-ho said that the Papin case was an inspiration for his 2019 Academy Award-winning film Parasite, which focused on class difference. The most recent play about the murder is Kesselman's 1980 drama, My Sister in This House, which more or less tells the story of the murder as motivated by Madame threatening to separate the sisters and reveal their forbidden incestuous relationship. I'll get back to Sartre's whirligig and incantation, but for now, I want to shift my talk to my course, Women Who Kill, which I taught at NYU in Abu Dhabi and NYU in New York in the spring and fall of 2024, respectively. I can say that in both cases, the class filled immediately, and with a cap of 15 students in all places. And in Abu Dhabi, they had to open another section of the course, so that I taught two sections of the course. I'll describe one section. In Abu Dhabi, 10 Emirati, 2 Filipino, 1 Korean, and 1 American student enrolled in my course as part of a humanities core curriculum on that campus. In New York, the 17 Tisch School of the Arts drama students enrolled in the course as part of their theater and performance studies academic curriculum. The 17 students in New York are mostly from the US, but also from Hong Kong, Mexico, and Israel. Both groups of students included many horror and true crime buffs who avidly consume all sorts of gruesome murder stories in the form of theater, television, films, and podcasts. Both classes received the same trigger warnings, which previously I never gave, but I started giving. Anyway, my syllabus says, our readings include horrific murders, women murdering children, husbands, parents, and shopkeepers, children murdering parents. There are disturbing ideas about women, exasperating legal determinations, troubling historical circumstances, and unheard cries for help. There are graphic scenes in some of the plays we will read and films we will watch. We'll discuss the violence we read about in the plays and see on film, while being careful not to refer to extreme violence casually. So, the subject of Women Who Kill is distinctively situated in different cultures, types of theater, and time periods, with both unique representational strategies and recurring ideas about women who kill across cultures. How and why do women kill? And just to note that most murderers are men, so this is a kind of unusual category. Is there a relationship between fictional women who kill and real women murderers? Do common plot structures, characters, and styles inform their representation? And what about the motives? Revenge, escape from abuse, the desire to live lives out of reach, cling to children in an afterlife, secure inheritance, find financial independence, and generally resist the debilitating effect of what my students always refer to as patriarchy. The reading from my course includes, of course, Agamemnon by Aeschylus, in which Clytemnestra murders Agamemnon out of revenge for killing her daughter, Iphigenia. The Humanities, also by Aeschylus, in which Athena famously establishes a corrupt form of justice by promising Orestes, who's murdered his mother, acquittal if he agrees never to attack Athens. Athena also declares that as a woman without a mother, born from the head of Zeus, she is always on the side of the man. And she agrees with Apollo that the parent is, quote, he who mounts, close quote, effectively denying maternal rights and disempowering the Furies who protected women by punishing matricides, mother killers. The trial in the Humanities is known for being the first dramatic representation of a jury to adjudicate tribal violence, a solution that is, nevertheless, at the expense of legal equity for women. Athena's justice places men at the center of power and women in the underworld. This inequitable treatment of women under the law is continually represented in theater up through the 21st century. We also read Medea, of course, by Euripides, about the woman who kills her sons in an act of vengeance to make Jason, her husband, suffer for leaving her for another woman. Song of Death, and I'm sorry about my pronunciation, by Tawfi el-Hakim, about Asakir, who has her son Ilwan murdered because he refuses to carry out an honor killing to avenge the blood of his father. Blood Relations by Sharon Pollock, about the kind of infamous American murderer Lizzie Borden, who axed her father and stepmother in 1892, but was acquitted at trial, later to be convicted in the court of public opinion when it became known that she had a female lover. Other American plays based on true crime are Trifles by Susan Glaspell, about a farm wife who strangles her abusive husband, and Mackinac by Sophie Treadwell, about a young woman who, feeling trapped in a predetermined, routinized life, murders her husband, explaining, quote, I just want to be free. We read the Chinese Sichuan opera version of Pan Jin Liang by Wei Minglun, who depicts a beautiful but poor woman who marries a deformed and inadequate man. Past versions of Pan's story portray her as a femme fatale, looking to ensnare men by seducing them. The Sichuan opera portrays Pan as trapped by lower-class circumstances and gender. We read the modern no play Sotoba Komachi by Yukio Mishima, about the 99-year-old Komachi and a poet, a young poet, who suffers from having illusions about truth and beauty. Transported back to a dance Komachi attended many years earlier, the poet suddenly sees this very, very old woman as beautiful, despite the fact that she's warned him that if he compliments her beauty, he will die. And so he does, and he perishes. Colonialism, spirit possession, revenge, sexual deviance, lack of freedom, cultural tradition, and legal inequity are all part of how female murderers are represented in this dramatic literature. Every play in my course is accompanied by a theoretical article. We also viewed several films most importantly, the National Theatre's production of Medea, and the 1982 feminist film, A Question of Silence, by the Dutch filmmaker Marlene Goris. I'm going to grab my water. Excuse me. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, I tell my class, and they all know what that means immediately. The 2003 slogan was part of a tourism campaign to create an image of adult freedom in that notorious city, Las Vegas. In the context of my class, it means creating an environment where students can speak freely, and what is said in class stays in class. We are, I tell my students, an intellectual think tank, and our work is only as good as our commitment, participation, and generosity. My emphasis is that creating a generative dialogic classroom is the responsibility of everyone in the room. In my class at NYU Abu Dhabi, there were clashing points of view for sure, and this surprised the Emirati women who had never had so many other Emirati women in the same classroom with them on the NYU Abu Dhabi campus. So they, many of them, anticipated that they would mostly agree, and they were surprised to find out that as we began to read and discuss this literature, that in fact they had many differences. As part of her final essay, Leila, I've changed all the names of my students here, wrote, quote, "The intersectionality of my religious beliefs, coursework, and culture often allowed me to engage with these theatrical works in different ways." Leila is a psychology major. Many of them were pre-law. As a psychology major, Leila read Medea's motivations as a conflict between experiencing great pain at the death of her children, were she to kill them, and not wanting to appear weak. She writes, "If we analyze Medea's inner monologue, it becomes evident that she acknowledges the potential pain that the children's death would inflict on her. This suggests that Medea does feel a maternal connection toward her children, albeit one that deviates from the conventional maternal bond one expects. Of course, Medea's aversion to seeming weak appears to actually conjure her inner conflict. Unable to reconcile the two, it could be that she resorts to self-deception when she claims that they, the children, would suffer imminent harm from the people of Corinth, were she not to kill them herself. Hence, the only way Medea can protect her children is to kill them. In other words, she justified this unthinkable act as an act of maternal defense. In this way, she has no choice but to kill them, and she's not at fault." Leila also described the difference between her reading of Medea and that of her two close friends and classmates. This is Leila. Amina and Amal both stated that part of the reason why they could not forgive or feel compassion for Medea stemmed from the fact that killing is haram in Islam and that children are a blessing from Allah. This seemed quite interesting because my opinion on Medea diverged from theirs, and this was also because of my religious beliefs stemming from Islam. In my religion, we have a saying, if a brother does an act that you disapprove him, give him 1 to 70 excuses. If you find one, that is good. If not, you should believe there is an excuse you have not considered. When it came to Medea, this was generally my first approach when examining her character and her rationale for murder, close quote. Amina, for her part, wrote that Islam illustrates the relationship between mothers and children in that children are taught to, quote, do good to your parents, but even more so in the prominent Islamic saying by the Prophet, peace be upon him, Heaven lies beneath the feet of your mother. However, Amina wrote, it's a reciprocal dynamic that guides familial relations and interactions. That's how it works for us, and how it's always been, even in the actual stories we're told. Amina was similarly insightful about Panjin Lian, who she understands as getting carelessly drunk, confessing her love for her husband's brother, Wu Song, but later avoiding responsibility by attributing her actions to alcohol. This struck me as pure foolishness, wrote Amina. Some in my class may argue that she was desperate for love and companionship, but my brain couldn't help but argue that she should have anticipated the repercussions, especially knowing Wu Song was a conscientious upholder of traditional values, not to mention that her previous experience with men always ended with heaps of disappointment, and yet she continued to remain naive and trust them blindly, which frustrated me to no end. After all, even after being rejected by Wu Song, Pan Jinlian fell for Jimeng Qing's scheme, willingly engaged in an affair with him behind her husband's back, and ultimately poisoned her own husband for his sake, that is, for Jimeng's sake, only for her husband to abandon her in the end, which we could all understand, except for her, for some odd reason. Hence, this begs the question, was she truly helpless, or was she avoiding the truth that was right in front of her all along? I should add that Amina's interpretation of Panjin is informed by Islam's prohibition of drinking alcohol. So, in New York, my students readily aligned with the sentiments of scholar Bettine Van Zyl Smit in her theoretical essay, Medea the Feminist. Smit asks in what respects Medea, the murderer of her own children, might be regarded as feminist. Smith's question comes from her account of early 20th century British suffragists who used Medea's famous Women of Corinth speech as a rallying cry. Women of Corinth, Medea says to the chorus of women, I've come outside to show you have no cause to tarnish me with blame. Firstly, this is her speech, we are obliged to buy a husband at excessive cost and then accept him as the master of our body. That is even worse. And here's the throw that carries the highest stakes. Is he a good catch or a bad? For changing husbands is a blot upon a woman's good repute, and it's not possible to say no to the things that a husband wants. If a husband is not happy, he goes elsewhere to ease his state of mind. Women, however, are obliged to remain focused only on their husbands, and childbirth is far worse than warfare. Close quote. So Medea recognizes that the women of Corinth share an experiential reality that may make them compassionate for her situation. A woman may not be useful in battle, but when she is wrongly treated in the field of sex, says Medea, there is no other case of mind nor more deadly, none. But there is a limit. The chorus of Corinthian women will not go along with Medea's plans for murder as a punishment for Jason's infidelity and abandonment. Yet, they consent to remain silent about Medea's plan for murder. British suffragists use Medea's speech as a rallying cry for the need for women to be able to vote. Medea was pitied for being betrayed and abandoned, for having no financial or legal recourse, and for her unmitigated rage, but reviled for killing her children. In her essay, Smith points out that Euripides' text can be read as either feminist or misogynist. Medea can also represent, quote, oppressed racial groups, exploited colonials, and women. The changing interpretations of Medea in different places and times can teach us, asserts Smith, more about the nature of the human condition than any textbook could ever tell us. So now I want to go back to Sartre's whirligig, as I said earlier. Sartre writes that Genet merges the poles of appearance and reality, just like when a multicolored disc is spun. But it's not only Genet's play that creates whirligigs that blend realities. In both of my classes, students laughed about the murdering protagonists, even while bemoaning the murders they committed. And that is a curious thing that happens every time I teach this course. There's a lot of laughter. The phantom play acting that Sartre attributes to Claire and Solange appeared as a different kind of phantom in the classroom. The phantom in the classroom is the ephemeral, emergent consciousness of the class as a whole. It is the thing that we're trying to see and trying to grasp. It is the recognition of a shared experiential reality that lives alongside the realities of both our fictional and real female protagonists. We, in the classroom, no man has registered for this class today. We, in the classroom, are on the fake becomes true side of the equation that Sartre proposes when he writes, "The fake is true, and the true can be expressed only by means of the fake. The female protagonists, who are our subjects, are fake, not literally real, even when based on actual murders. But they are also true expressions of women's unequal treatment under the law, of the historical tolerance in some cultures of abuse and rape, the vulnerability of class and gender and race differences, and the limited recourse to financial well-being, among other inequities." Why are we laughing? I repeatedly asked my class. One answer is perhaps because when violence is played in theater, art, and popular culture, we're relieved of responsibility. We suspend disbelief to grasp the tragedy and perhaps to momentarily suspend our own obligation to obey the law in order to imaginatively live out our own justice by vengeance. But this explanation is not satisfactory. It's too psychological and does not capture the complexity of reading and spectatorship. In theater, for example, we follow the story and its development. At the same time, we discern the way the story is told. At the same time, we critique the story and its telling. At the same time, we bring our own interpretive context to our understanding of the story. And at the same time, we recognize and share the feeling of the experiential reality in the theater where we sit. Generally, teaching from a performance studies perspective means using scholarship from the field and knowing the provenance of ideas in the field. In my Women Who Kill course, it also means including the social realities that produce the plays we read, even though the plays themselves may not necessarily be transparent or even accurate versions of those realities. Understanding their recurrence and reinterpretation over time and the cultural differences in their interpretation and reception is integral to cultural and religious diversity in a performance studies classroom. And so, yes, NYU Abu Dhabi has the most diverse classrooms I've ever experienced. The classroom is a live performance in its own right, a collective staging, a collectively devised world of ideas, its own enactment. It is its own secular ritual where performed human behavior creates its own world. As we learn, we make a world together. Close reading, interpretation, the provenance of ideas, and the different ways we relate to what we read requires a dialogic exchange of ideas, an exchange that has to be taught alongside with the subject matter. But this doesn't explain the repeated laughter. In the film, A Question of Silence, three women who do not know one another, and this is the one film we watch together, the others they watch by themselves, Three women who do not know one another murder a male shopkeeper of a women's clothing store who they don't know. Why would a housewife, a waitress, and a secretary murder a man they don't know? The flashback structure of the film shows each woman in her daily life intercut with the murder itself. The secretary brings her ideas to a meeting only to have them rejected until they're spoken by a male colleague. The silent housewife is degraded by her husband for not making him tea in time before he has to leave for work. The waitress endures insults about her body from the men in the diner where she works. She talks back to them, but her back talk does not break her isolation. The unspoken permeates the film in ways that lead to an outbreak of laughter in the final courtroom scene. The female psychiatrist, Janine, who has been asked to assess the mental health of the female murderers, gives her professional diagnosis. She concludes at trial that the women who murdered the shopkeeper are not insane, and this comes as a shock in the courtroom. The prosecutor responds that Janine, despite her professional training, is, quote, speaking as a woman, close quote, publicly doubting her professional knowledge, adding to the list of what women commonly experience. My students in both places jeered this remark. The prosecutor adds, the case would be no different if three men had killed a female owner of a boutique. In the courtroom scene, this causes the three accused women to erupt into uncontrolled laughter. Three men killing a woman is entirely different from three women killing a man. The prosecutor just doesn't get it. Because of their uncontrolled laughter, the three accused women have to be removed from the courtroom. The psychiatrist joins them in their laughter and then walks out because she can no longer take the court seriously. So why were we laughing in my classrooms repeatedly throughout the semester? I don't think it's because the students are a bunch of latent murderers. The laughter expresses the recognition of a portion of female experiential reality that is absurd, contradictory, and discriminatory. One student proposed that the laughter expresses the queerness of the class, meaning a way of thinking that's other than usual, that women are framed by a patriarchal reality, but they are still able to see and speak from vantage points outside that reality. Part of a performance studies classroom is the acknowledgement of the performatives of the subject matter. In my course, Women Who Kill, the subject matter can have a kind of shimmering significance of fragmentary autobiography. In the binary of us and them, where the members of the class are us, and the female murders we read about are them, there's literally a no man's land of empathy and recognition. Empathy for the circumstances of women and recognition in the Oedipal sense of discovering who one is in a gendered matrix. In her book, Medea's Daughters, Jennifer Jones, and this is one of the theoretical readings of the course, Jennifer Jones proposes that there are narratives of containment and narratives of resistance. Narratives of containment portray women who kill as monstrous, manlike, deviant, abnormal, oversexed, defeminized foreigners, divided from other women, and typically lacking a maternal instinct and the ability to be self-sacrificing, and often either without the feminine skill of housekeeping or knowing the skill so well as to be able to employ it for murder. Narratives of resistance resist binary assumptions and portray women murderers in the context of their real lives, according to Jones, in which equality under the law, respect, control of their bodies, economic security, and dignity are not, in fact, guaranteed. Narratives of resistance recognizes women's legal, financial, political, and social experiential realities and rejects female criminality as simply an indication of abnormality. For one assignment, and I'm approaching the end now, what I call the provocation, students can do anything they want for 10 minutes, presented to the class about any female murderer, other than the ones that are on the syllabus. Provocations can be from data, popular culture, the law, theater history. Most students chose to present the cases of real female murderers. Carly Gregg, 15-year-old girl who murdered her mother on March 19th, 2024. The Ma Kit Chi broth murders in Hong Kong, which generated movies, TV shows, and novels, most of which emphasized Ma Kit Chi's cooking because she would murder people and dismember them and then make broth. Mary Tabbs, an enslaved woman who embraced the violence she observed as an enslaved person and later used it to terrorize her community. The famous Egyptian murderers, Raya and Sakina, about whom there was a television series in Egypt, which my students kept telling me about, at least that aired all last year, who murdered 17 women and were the first women in Egypt to receive the death penalty under the modern judicial system. My students know all of this. The American mass murderer Eileen Wuornos, she was the first female mass murderer in the US, who killed and robbed 17 of her male clients between 1989 and 1990. And Lindsay Clark, this was recently, like within the past 2 months in the New Yorker, the woman who murdered her 3 children after being evaluated at Boston Women's and Infants Hospital, where she was not diagnosed as having postpartum depression. Clark then checked into McLean Psychiatric Hospital, also in Boston, on New Year's Day, but was released on January 5th, and then killed her 3 children on January 24th. So there's not a continuum, but a mindfulness about what we're reading in dramatic literature is in fact also occurring in real life in different ways, in different places. So, in conclusion, the public portrayal of these real female murderers conformed to the narrative distinctions that Jones makes. Sometimes the narratives contain both elements of resistance and containment. The students, for their part, recognize that, like the women of Corinth, they share a portion, no matter how small, of experiential reality with the murdering protagonists. It's all preposterous and tragically and painfully true, and their laughter is perhaps knowledge of both, a knowledge of a certain form of resistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Martin, for such compelling and insightful presentation. So you have illuminated the complexities of teaching a theatrical text that confronted gendered violence, agency, and societal perceptions of female killers. So Professor stated some examples of these theatrical texts, mainly women killing their husbands, children, or men for various reasons. She underscores how women who kill present its dramatic context to serve as a powerful teaching tool for exploring different but necessary conversations about gender, justice, and violence. She also reflects her experiences teaching theatrical texts about women who kill to students in diverse cultural and geographical settings, namely at New York University School of the Arts Teach and Abu Dhabi as well. Also for her, the classroom functions as a live art or performance, a performance space where she actively engages in the dynamic exploration of theatrical text, transforming learning into an interactive and interpretive act or only female voice no man's land, and also the idea of laughter at the end that serves as a key factor for students. Your explorations of these themes not only deepens our understanding of performance studies, but also challenges us to think critically about our own roles as artists, scholars, or audiences. Now I would like to open the floor for discussion, so please feel free to share your thoughts with us. We still have like 10 minutes for discussion. Or any comments? Yes, Professor McKinsey?
Yes, good morning, and thank you for this wonderful talk. Did I hear you correctly? You said that you do not have any male students in your classes?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, how would you explain that?
Not thus far. I also teach feminism and theater, and for several years I didn't have any male students, but now I do. Something happened, and they actually do really wonderfully in the classroom. So how do I explain that? I think the title of the course, Women Who Kill, invites females to like, I don't know whether women are greater consumers of true crime and horror films. I don't know, but or whether men anticipate that the classroom is going to have a kind of female bonding that they may not be a part of, but they could be a part of it. I mean, not female, obviously, but bonding. I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
أنا سأتحدث باللغة العربية لأن هناك إشاعة أخذت على ريا وسكينة. ريا وسكينة أولا هم كان القتل عندهم مقاومة ولتمويه الاستعمار. أبدأ من شوي. أوكي. بالنسبة لقضية ريا وسكينة هناك تمويه. بالنسبة لقضية ريا وسكينة ريا وسكينة هو تمويه عسكري سياسي إنجليزي، لأنهم هما ثبت أنهم شقيقتين كان القتل عندهم من باب المقاومة، خصوصا أنهم كان تقطنتا من وراء مباشرة من مركز الشرطة، فكانت هي بالعكس تستخدم النساء لاستدراج العسكر، وبدأت فترة أن بدأ عدد العسكر الإنجليزي يقل، فحينما وقع القبض على الشقيقتين كان لابد أنهم يعطون ثقة للعسكر الإنجليزي، لأنه كان اسكندرية مرأف قريب في مصر، فكانوا حتى لا يهربون من المقاومة، فتم القبض على الشقيقتين بأنهم كانوا يقتلان النساء ويستدرجهم للسرقة. لكن أثبت العكس، لأنني أنا زرت مصر 2016 ثبت أن هناك حصلت مؤخرا عن طريق محامي اسكندراني عن براءتهما، وثبت أنهما كانتا مقاومتان وليس بالقتل من باب استدراج النساء والسرقة. وشكرا.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the story of Ryan Sakina is not readily available in English in any great detail, so I didn't follow it closely. But I will say what happens with many times is that the guilt and the motivation for crimes are revisited. Like Lizzie Borden was initially acquitted, but was not really understood as being guilty until there's kind of historical revisionist narratives about inheritance, about abuse at home. So the stories have a bit of fluidity in them.
Thank you for while you were presenting. I saw it just. It was a story unfolding itself, but let me start before asking my question. I would like to start with the premise, which is as the following. Yeah, the description of the structure through which we see the world is a story. So if we may agree on that as well as not. So based on this kind of premises, what is your own story? Seeing that you've taught in different places and you've roamed different stories from different locations, which implies displacement, movement, a kind of interaction in different places. But going back to the premise, is that the background of your talk, that the structure or the description of the structure through which we see the world is a story? And if that is so, what is your story? And thank you so much.
Well, I'm not entirely sure I understand your question, but certainly a course that uses dramatic literatures from all over the world is about stories and their similarities and differences and our relationship to those stories. Yeah.
You can clarify more your question?
Yeah, just to clarify more, I mean, the description of the structure of story is structure could be that of power, could be that of power relations, could be that of hegemony, could be that of anything that unfolds, I would say, the patterns within structure into perhaps victim, victimizer, perhaps I don't know, just something like that. But it's based on the idea of power, power dynamics, hegemony, etc.
Well, maybe we think about structure differently. So when I think about the structure of a story, I think, is it the structure of flashback structure? Does it begin in medias res? Is it, does it begin at the end and then move to the beginning? I think of the actual structure of the storytelling. When it comes to power, I think that as more of a kind of the subject that gets played out. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any other questions or comments? Yes, please, Anas.
طيب شكرا على الكلمة المتدخلة. وأنا أتساءل عن قلت شكرا على المداخلة القيمة. شكرا على المداخلة القيمة المثيرة. تعليقي يخص جماليات القبح وجماليات الشر، والقتل شكل من أشكال الشر الذي نعيشه باستمرار. هل الطلبة قادرون بآليات النقد على فهم الخلفيات من وراء تدريس القبح وتدريس الشر باعتباره تطهيراً وبحثاً عن السلام الداخلي والسلام المنشود؟ وشكراً.
Could you just repeat your question? I'm not sure what your question is.
Can we, as professor, can we teach students the idea of evil or devil. Like you are teaching murder for students, women who kill. So these values of killing or murder. So what do you think about that? Does it contribute or foster peace, peace in within self, or peace worldwide? What's your own comments about that?
I don't know that I think about it in exactly that way, but in the case of both courses, the students are avid consumers of stuff that I would never watch. Like both places, the most gruesome horror films, they follow true crime. They, I had to say, you guys, could you not? When they would launch into graphic descriptions, that the professor needed trigger warnings. But then, in relationship to that, what they get a handle on is, of course, understanding dramatic literature across cultures, and theoretical articles are addressing this stuff in interesting ways, but it gives them an analytic handle on the things that they're already consuming. And I think that that's very, very important. I do find myself saying, wait a second, this is murder. You have to go back to how serious and grave that is. Because they're 18, 19, 20-year-olds. They get a bit giddy. So I don't know if that has anything to do with peace, but it has to do with the gravitas of the subject matter.
Yes, Anas, can you give Mr. Jamal, then we move to...
Thank
very
you.
brief.
I'll try to be brief. Thank you, Professor Karl Martin, for this enlightening lecture. As I was listening to you, I heard a panoply of voices coming from your classes in the Arab world, in Dubai, of students' reactions to the murders, to the stories. But what of the other side? What about your students in New York? Are their reactions more or less the same? Because I heard all the Aminas, Amels, but I don't know about all the other Amandas and I don't know who.
Yeah. So, I don't have as many specific examples from my New York students. I taught the last class last Tuesday, so this week. So I'm still digesting it myself and their particular reactions. But I will say that they readily, they don't summon their personal religions or religious beliefs for the most part. Once in a while it will come up. They summon their, some of their cultural uniqueness, like the young woman from Mexico would, bring in her experiential reality with a Mexican mother. And they readily, in the case of the theoretical readings, follow Smith's feminist evaluation of Medea. And Smith is not the only one. There's a wonderful Greek classicist. Her name is Edith Hall. And she writes about the different stagings and receptions of Medea in different moments in British history according to emergent changes in the law about women, which generates interpretation, reinterpretation, reinterpretation, reinterpretation. So they follow that very closely. They also, well, in both classes, I never use the word the patriarchy. I just think it's too, it just closes off a bunch of ideas, but they use it all the time in both places. So this also, in the American class, is something that they refer to. They're also very sensitive to gender identity and gender identity. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So maybe due to time constraints, we will have last question or comments.
I try to be very quick too. Thank you for this really interesting lecture. The question I have is, you mentioned there's different ways of relating that you encourage in class with this diverse student group. And I think this is, really interesting because it's so hard for me in class, to really get students to talk about this freely and without fear in front of the other or the teacher. And I would be really interested in how you do this, how you manage, to get them speak about their perspectives, what they bring.
That's a great question. So I encourage them to come to office hours, and just just to chat, and they want to chat about everything, and within, I think, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. That I'm signaling to them, you're not going to gossip about anything that anyone says in this room outside of the room. I do model, I try to model a dialogic exchange, like if one student says, well, I really disagree with X, I encourage that disagreement to signal that this is okay, and then I raise questions about it. I reread everything before each class so that I'm always tracking students' accuracy and that they're connecting what they're saying to what we've read, literally in the case of a play, and accurately in the case of theoretical ideas. I try to be like another student, like, well, you've just said this, but that contradicts with what Mary has just said. So you keep having to model the dialogic exchange. And and in Abu Dhabi, maybe a little bit more so, students really want to talk to their professors. It's part of the culture of the experience. They don't run out of the classroom. And many times, especially the Emirati students, would come to my office hours in groups of 3 or 4 and stay for like 2 hours. So that encourages them to feel safe, and it's a constant labor. Yeah.
I think we still can have more questions. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you so much for your speech. I just wanted to ask you if you know there are 2 contemporary Arab Medeas, two contemporary plays. One is I Medea by Suleiman al-Bassam, and the other one is called Jogging Masrah ala Qaid al-Tatwir, Theater in Development. And it's by Hanan Haja Ali. And I perfectly agree with your idea that myth is received differently through times and places. Because I presented jogging last month in Italy, and actually the audience was surprised that the point was not about vengeance, Medea's vengeance, but was more political and rebellion. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, maybe you could add it to your classroom to see how's the reception of students, since these authors are from the Arab world. So maybe in Abu Dhabi this can give another perception of the martyr.
Of the Medea story. Yeah, I would love to do that. I would love, that's excellent. I think you could do a whole class just on Medea and revisions of Medea and Medeas in different cultures, because people go back to it again and again and again. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, they exist in translation too.
Great.
Both of them.
Are there any other questions? Yes, please.
So thank you very much, dear Professor. So I have just one comment using the Tunisian professor or Tunisian philosopher Fatih al-Miskini, who said that if we want to, for instance, to stop terrorism in the world, so we should we shouldn't use weapons or wars. You know, instead, we should use teaching art. So this is what I want to tell. So is his words correct or no? Thanks.
Only comments about teaching art. Like, for example, instead of using weapons in wars, we can resort to art to end the war or any kind of brutal circumstances in the world we have nowadays. Your comments or like
Yeah,
teaching art to
yeah.
end this kind of murder relating to your speech.
Yeah, I mean, it's yes, and one finds that the what happens in war everywhere tends to happen in more or less the same way everywhere. The horrors are repeated. So I think I once read a horrible book, which I don't recommend, but it is, I think it's called A Woman in Berlin, and it's about what happens when the Soviets take over a German town. And it's useful to understand how the mechanisms of how things happen. I mean, some people would argue that knowledge of violence can perpetuate violence. It's possible. I don't necessarily agree with that point of view. But yeah, I mean, I think that theater especially, has the ability to make us see things ideally more clearly and be something instead of actual violence, so that we look at and understand how it works.
Thank you, Professor Martin. Do we have any other additional comments or questions? Yes, Professor Kinsey?
The French-Moroccan writer Leila Slimani published a book called Lullaby some years ago, and she won the sort of one of the prestigious literary prizes in France, the Goncourt Prize. And the story was based on a true sort of a crime in the US. A babysitter had killed the two children that she was looking after. And what is interesting about the novel is that she leaves this kind of ambiguity. She does not try to explain why this woman did what she did. And it's very interesting that the critical reception focused on that. And a lot of people were quite upset about the idea that the novelist was not trying to give any clues as to the motivation of this woman. Do you think it's really something about how this ambiguity with regard to the violence of women in these cases is, in a sense, something much more disturbing than the violence that is, committed by men?
Personally, I don't think it's more or less disturbing. I think it's different, and that in dramatic literature, if we make that small circle of reference, that there tends to be some kind of social political explanation for the murders rather than just kind of wanton killing. So I think dramatic literature is by way of explanation, even if the conclusion is not absolute, that what we experience is a vantage point. And this changes over time. My students in the US wanted to really emphasize that Medea is a foreigner, which because of all of the conversations about immigration and preventing it and shipping of immigrants around the country. And so they really want to emphasize that Medea is very vulnerable because she is a foreigner. But you know, in 20 years, the view of and the reading of Medea will be necessarily different. Yeah, and productions I saw like 2 years ago, production of Medea at the Met, and this is something that happens over and over again, is that the ending is revisited. At the production at the Met, Medea kills her children and builds a fire, and then throws herself on top of it. She doesn't escape. So that there are these attempts to make her not so horrible, right? That she has to get out as well as save her children from that one version of the story, from being murdered by the people of Corinth, who will be angry because of what Medea does. Yeah, I mean, it's endlessly fascinating. There is a book, by the way, that is many different versions of Antigone from all over the world. I think we could have the same kind of book if somebody wants to do that, about all the Medeas all over the world. Yeah.
Yes. And as we have Professor Jalid. Yeah.
Good morning. My comment is about how do we go from theory into practice in class. My question is about, is there a way that simplifies those theoretical terminology while teaching students arts in general? Thank you.
Teaching students
What do you mean by art in general? Like talking about drama, theater?
No. My question is about enacting theory in classes. Usually, students face challenges while studying theories, but they don't. I think they don't have any problems with practical classes. It's usually clear when it is practical. So the challenge for me as a professor is that how we can go from theory into practice in class. How can we simplify theories to students?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's an eternal challenge, I think. In the case of my class in New York, it's an honors seminar, so students had to apply to get in it. I think I don't know anything about practice, which is probably not exactly true, but I only teach academic classes, and in my department, students are required to take 6 academic classes on theater of some sort or other. We have a huge range of course offerings, and I feel that's very important to have super educated theater artists. One of the things I do in the class to unite theory and practice is I collaborate with a colleague who is a set designer, and he also does Medea, and his project for his class is that they have to find a space, like he gives them a like 6-block radius in New York City where they would like to stage Medea, then they have to translate that space to the stage. So we make teams of students between his class and mine, and my students have never studied set design. They're usually studying acting. And I prep my students to play the role of dramaturg to help the set designer figure out what space is most advantageous or interesting for staging Medea, and it makes them think in entirely different ways. And then they have to deal with, are they going to use the chariots, the Deus Ex Machina at the end, or what is the implication of not using that? And if they don't use it, what could they do? And what does the space infer about what ideas will the space itself lend to the play? One team of students selected the courtyard of the law school, which they thought was emphasized certain aspects of Medea being outside the law. Yeah, but it's you know, I always yell at them too, like, about not thinking that way as much as possible.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Martin. Now we give the floor to Professor Lalou.
Thank you. Could I ask you a direct question? What's the title of your class? And it belongs to which track? Which subject? Is it sociology? Is it drama? Or because
So
it looks to me it's
in Abu Dhabi, it's part of the humanities core curriculum. And they have science, social science, humanities in Abu Dhabi. And the faculty who teach in the core curriculum are from all the disciplines, right? In New York, and in Abu Dhabi, yeah, so none of the students in my class in Abu Dhabi were theater students, none. In New York, they are BFA, Bachelor of Fine Arts.
Fine Arts.
Acting students, although some also do design. And the course is part of the required, the course itself is not required, but theater and performance studies academic classes, 6 of them are required. And I think that's one of the greater number of required academic classes for undergraduate theater students. So they know before they come to NYU that they're going to have intellectual training as well as acting and practical training. Yeah.
Because I saw it more of a therapy sessions than...
No, it's not. I would die.
No, and this would join, sorry, this would join what our colleague in Arabic mentioned. He talked about, do the students have the critical tools to understand what is evil?
Yeah.
I mean, this is what your friend, our friend was trying to ask earlier. Are they equipped, or does the class offer them this capacity or capability to critically understand what is evil? You know, murder, for example, is evil.
You know, I don't think I don't think we focus on evil per se, although the subject comes up that this is the gravitas of the subject matter is very important to continue acknowledging, because they tend to get kind of giddy for some reason with the material. Yeah, and I have to keep emphasizing that. And I think that's because the kind of stuff that they watch, like devil doll murderers and is built upon a certain kind of thrill. And that's not what we're doing, and I keep moving away from that as much as possible.
Thank you, Professor. Do you have any other comments or questions? Yes?
طيب أنا عندي سؤال طريف باعتبارك أستاذة جليلة وأنت امرأة. خلال الأعمال الدرامية التي تدرسينها، هل ترين أن المرأة أقبح على مستوى الشر من الرجل، في الأعمال، نتحدث عن الأعمال الدرامية. يعني قارني بين شر الرجل وشر المرأة. ما رأيك؟ Thank you. شكرا.
It's like a personal opinion.
No. Short answer, no. So, but so okay, if we look at, but they're characterized mostly entirely differently. If we look at Agamemnon's murder of Iphigenia, that he equivocates. He's like, well, if I do this, it may come back to haunt me. And he and Menelaus go back and forth, back and forth. And actually, Agamemnon changes his mind a number of times about killing Iphigenia. He doesn't literally believe that, oh, you know, the god says, you know, we got to do this, otherwise we'll never set sail for Troy. He thinks that's a convenient idea, but then he keeps assessing it and going back and forth in very human terms. And the human terms are, he doesn't want to lose face in front of all these warriors that have gathered at Aulis, right? He doesn't want to be humiliated by Odysseus. And so he has a different circumstance for his murder than a woman would ever face. A woman is not usually going to be leading many different troops to war. So I don't think women are more evil than men are more evil than women. For sure, I think they're in different positions in society, and it creates different stories from with different representational strategies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for you, yeah, it makes sense. Are you satisfied with the answer, her answer? Good. Do we have any other comment? All right. So thank you all for your insightful questions and thoughtful participation. Thank you, Professor Carol Martin, for your insightful, fascinating presentation today. And we wish you a good stay for the next session. Thank you so much.